and welcome to Steve's Place. And tonight we're going to have a really interesting night. We're going to have Phil Thomas here, and he'll be talking about Cayce technology, Cayce, and we'll get more into that during the show. But he is one of the uh, most well-known synthesizers of the 20th century. So anyway, uh, I'd like to remind everyone to that this week we'll be at the Biomed conference in Las Vegas. Let me bring this up. Okay, we'll be at the Biomed conference, Vegas, and with that, we'll be able to visit with a lot of vendors that have a lot of technology out in the vendor hall there, and they're also combine it with the Alien Event Show, and they'll have people there to discuss disclosure, the secret space program, ufology, and alien technology. For those who are into that, I'm sure there's some probably anti-gravity, and I'm sure the thing they'll be discussing will be these sightings of these drones over this military base in Virginia for 17 days now, and they don't know who or what that is all about. It's because of the swarm. So you might get a chance to come on down to Vegas here on Thursday, and if you live in town, you might want to swing by there and check it out. It'll be at the Alexis Park Resort over on Harmon, across from what used to be the Hard Rock. I saw Cheech Chong there. And there's two shows, one location, Alexis Park, October 17th to 20th. And the phone number is 702-890-1290 for more information on that, or go to info@biomedexpo.com. I'm sure there'll be someone there to help you out. And if you can't make it, they're also having a live stream for $99, I guess, for all the events. And here's the information for that. So I'll be there. I'll have a stage there, or not a stage, but a booth there. And I'll have all my books there and a lot of videos on that. And a lot of my friends will be there to help you get signed up for like next year's conference, And that brings us up to our conference. This year's conference will be in Albuquerque. We're still working on the site and everything, but we're already starting a pre-registration. We had to raise our rates, okay? But in lieu of that, because of that, we're giving a 50% discount. If you sign up by October 31st, if you sign up a second person, you can get an additional 5% off. And teens are free, and let's see, special student rates. So anyway, consider getting registered for next year. It will be in Albuquerque, I'm pretty sure of it. And I think you'll all have a great time if you come in. In the meantime, we also, if you go to our website, teslatech.info, and click on this banner here, that will take you to our live stream material, and which are now video on demand. It's $99 to get those, and it's a lifetime fee. I mean, you get it once and that's it. And you have access to over like about 30 hours plus of videos on that, and you get not only the presentations, you also get all of the not just the presentation, but you get all the fill-in material, like when during the between speakers, Karen and Jason were interviewing the speakers and attendees there, and that's all been taped, and that is part of the deal. Plus, you can get T-shirts there. Order your T-shirts there. They're a great design. I love the black one myself. Anyway, if you get a chance, go check it out. Help us out. Okay. And then, last but not least, the YouTube channel. Okay, if you go to testatech.info, go to the yellow box there, and you click on the Testatech um, channel. That will bring up the sign up sheets. You know, we have over 200, possibly 300 videos there that would take and uh, that are free. Okay, the subscriptions are free, so we have a couple hundred videos available there for free. Plus, we also have a pay-per-view. Okay, not pay-per-view, but monthly membership, $9.99, and we have access to over 1,000 videos. All the videos that Testatech has put together up to 2023 is up there. Still got a couple more from last year's conference, and then we'll start doing this year's conference later. But I also have almost all the global science conferences up there. This is great material. This is core material that you're not going to get anywhere else. And so go ahead, get up there, get signed up for the memberships. Okay, I think you'll have you find it well worth the money, and you can view these anywhere. And like I say, exclusive memberships, global access. You know, from the trenches of Ukraine to the halls of New York, you can take and view this stuff. I mean, who would have thought? Internet's available everywhere now, even in the middle of the desert. You know, it's incredible. So anyway, sign up for it 24/7, $9.99, and you can always subscribe. You should always subscribe anyway. That's free, and we're trying to get to 20,000 subscribers in the next month here. We're up to 18,000 now. Let's see if we can hit that 20,000. So let your friends know about us. You know. Okay, now, oh yeah, and finally, hit that thumbs up button on the YouTube thing down below on YouTube. It helps the search engines find us and let others know about us. Okay, and without further ado, let me introduce you to Phil Thomas. Welcome, Phil.
Hello.
And Phil has been working with the Cayce material since forever.
Pretty much, yeah. I got interested, like so many people, like basically when I was still in high school, I started reading Cayce books and, Edgar Cayce on. There's probably a couple of dozen of those books. And, eventually I started going down to Virginia Beach where the Institute is and the Association for Research and Enlightenment, the ARE. And, like an annual pilgrimage to go down there and check it out. And at one point, I met this guy who was, he came up to me in the library and tapped me on the shoulder and asked me to come over and help him clean up his garage. And this old guy, and I was okay with that. Sometimes you just go with whatever. And turns out he was the guy who was building these, wet cells and radial devices. He was doing radionics work. He was doing all this kind of, stuff that nobody else really wanted to get into the Cayce readings. And he sort of took me under his wing, and that weekend thing I ended up staying there for a couple of months, and then he got sick, and then he passed on. And I went back home, but it was obvious that that was what I was supposed to be doing, so I picked it up from there.
Well, we have an article you wrote for us back in 1999. You can find this at testatech.info. And the exotic research back issues is called The Wet Cell. And you can learn all about Phil and his backstory and everything. The main focus, this is all up online there on our website. But I guess the big thing with Cayce is he had 4 modalities of healing. And here they are, carbon and animated ash. So how does that work?
The carbon and animated ash were Casey's way of actually oxygenating cellular malignancy without being invasive. It's carbonized electrified bamboo, and you eat that. You take it orally, and after a few minutes, you expose yourself to a particular lamp, a particular light that has a wavelength that passes through the body. And as it does that, then it excites the ash, which is already at the site. Let's say it's a tumor site or something like that. And what it does, because the carbon has got 2 properties. It's got a electric field on it, and that's what actually anchors it to the site, the tumor site, because that also has a field, and it's a magnetic connection. And then the wavelength that passes through the body actually excites the ash, and the ash is carrying high concentrations of oxygen, and because it's right at the the place where the malignant cells are, it oxygenates them, and they either die or they can actually revert back to healthy cells as well. So that was Casey's way of addressing cellular malignancy. And this was 100 years ago, and there wasn't hardly any cancer back then.
And how do you apply that?
How do you what?
How do you apply that? Do you rub it on you like a salve or something?
No, you take it orally. It goes into the bloodstream almost immediately. And then after a few minutes, you expose yourself to a specific type of light form that has a waveform that passes through the body. And as it does that, it excites the ash. And when it does, is it releases that oxygen into the site. And when you oxygenate those cells, they, like I say, they either die or they revert back to healthy cells. So that was Casey's way of actually addressing cellular malignancy, long before it became, a common problem. Casey had foresight. He knew that, 100 years from when he was talking about this stuff, that, because back in those days, the incidence of being diagnosed with cellular malignancy during your lifetime was about 1 in 800. But, today it's every other person. So, it gives you an idea of, how far ahead that he was, because he knew it wasn't going to be too long before things were going to change. And so he set this up so that, people would have a way of addressing it.
So Edgar Cayce, he lived when? Back in the 1900s?
Yeah, he started talking about this about 100 years ago.
Okay. And he'd have like these readings. He'd go like into meditation or what?
It was a self-induced trance, and someone would be there to ask him questions after he, they generally speaking, people would write letters to him, and they'd say, "Oh, I have this problem. Can you help me?" And that, his secretary would write back and say, "Well, we need to know where you're going to be, when you're going to be there, and we can give you a reading at such and such a time." And so Cayce would actually, travel to that particular body, where, no matter where it was, as long as he knew where it was, and he'd examine it, and then talk about the various different systems and what was out of balance and how to bring it back into balance. And because he did that during the course of his lifetime, there's 14,000 plus documented readings in Virginia Beach at the library there. Each are, like 3 or 4 pages, double spaced. It gives you a wealth of information that ultimately became the standard, and also he's the father of holistic medicine, because all the stuff that he's talking about is all from nature.
Well, going back to the four modalities here, you also have atomic iodine.
Cayce, back in those days, iodine was used, but for various different problems. A lot of it, like in for animals and things like that. But people couldn't figure out how to use it themselves. I mean, it was being used to. About the time Cayce was talking about this was back during the Depression. The government finally figured out that there was a correlation between goiter and iodine deficiency. And that's when we started iodizing salt. And we were the first country to do that. And then eventually the rest of the world picked up on it. So the government thought, oh, good, we fixed that problem. That fixes all the problems that have to do with iodine deficiency. But really, it was just the tip of the iceberg. They didn't really understand that, iodine is an essential element. It's something that every cell of the body actually needs in order to function normally. It doesn't need a lot, but it needs a little. And so Cayce started talking about it, and he talked about it extensively. There's over 4,400 occurrences of the term atomic iodine or atomidine in the Cayce readings during the course of the time that he was talking about it, which was really only a few years, because the atomic form is actually an electrified form. He said, okay, we can't really use iodine in its raw state because it's got a rough edge. It's a halogen, it's a poison. So what he suggested was put it through this electrification process, and then once you do that, it'll drop an ion, and then the body will be able to fully recognize it and then assimilate it. So that was his contribution there. And I started doing this about 25 years ago, and now there's there's many people that are doing various forms of iodine, and but it's basically thanks to Cayce, because nobody was doing it before I started doing it.
Okay, so
what does it do? Actually, it's important, because the thyroids are where most of the iodine is going to go, and the thyroids are right at the center of the whole glandular process. The glands control the chemistry of the body, right? So when you get the thyroids running, then the rest of the glandular system then can balance. And, people are trying to understand how the rest of the endocrine process works, but it doesn't actually stabilize until the thyroids are up and running. And the thyroids, as well as the reproductive glands, are the two aspects of the body that are hypersensitive to radiation. So once again, Cayce saw into the future, and he said, this is going to be a problem, because there wasn't a whole lot of, like today, everybody has a cell phone and a desktop and a laptop and every other imaginable thing that's giving off small amounts of radiation. But when you do it for 10, 20, 30 years, every day, all day long, your thyroids are going to shut down. And so it went from being a problem 30 years ago to now it's epidemic. Everybody has low thyroid, basically.
Wow. And how do you take that atomic iodine?
Well, yeah, most people just take it orally, but you can take it topically.
And rub it on your thyroid there, or?
Yeah. It's something he actually used in several of the different products that he discussed, because, the tonics and things like that, because he understood that thyroid function was a prerequisite to having, the rest of the chemistry of the body being able to move in a positive direction.
Okay, then you got the radio. It's the radio cell.
The radial device and the wet cell are kissing cousins. They're the two biomagnetic batteries that are unique to Cayce. And the radial device was talked about early on in the readings. It started around the 20s. and then Cayce used it in conjunction with a solution jar as a treatment device to actually introduce specific vibrations into the body. And then later on, maybe about 27 or so, the wet cell came into the readings, and once it did, then it took over the job of being the treatment device. And the radial device was still discussed, but it was talked about as interfacing with the circulatory system, as balancing the blood pressure and the pulse rate, which, you know,
So say that again about the wet cell. What does that affect the most?
well, the wet cell interfaces with the central nervous system.
Okay.
So there was Cayce went on to discuss that at length. He talked about both of them actually quite extensively. There's 1,000 readings on each of them, but
Okay.
the wet cell is the treatment device because that's the one that took over the job of being used in conjunction with a solution jar that would hold the vibration that that would be connected with wires and with cups on the ends. You put the cups on the body, and then the what Cayce referred to as the low form of electricity then would pick up the vibration of whatever was in the solution jar and deliver it into the body. So he used that to actually rebuild damaged nerve tissue. That was the primary thing he used it for. And, he discussed about 150 different degenerative disorders that it could be utilized for.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, here I threw a diagram of the wet cell up there, so people can see what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinated me because here's a concept that, and I was pretty well steeped in the readings by that time I got around to this. And so eventually I went to the beach. I sold everything I had, which wasn't anything, but it was enough to get to the beach. And I set up, a little shop there, and I started building the wet cell in accordance with the specs and the readings, which no one had ever actually done before. There were people that were building them for decades, but there wasn't any indication anybody had actually gotten any benefit from it. And I'm thinking to myself, this thing is either like way off base, or we just have to build it the way Cayce suggested and see what happens. Now, I wasn't actually involved with the organization. But I did want to do my experiments there at the beach because there was a lot of people there that were familiar with Cayce. So I just figured it'd be a lot simpler. And lo and behold, one by one, people started coming to me. I didn't do any marketing or advertising or anything like that. I just said, "Do you want to try this?" And one by one, over the course of the next decade, there were several people who recovered from these incurable ailments. And then I was asked to leave because there were people who took an interest in it there at the beach, and they said, it's time for us to take over and for you to leave. So that was 25 years ago, and I'm just now getting back to it because, the dust has settled, and they never had any success with it because, once again, they reverted back to the old paradigm of not actually building it the way Cayce suggested, and subsequently it never worked.
Well, I know when I was reading your paper, I think one of the proceedings from back in the Tesla Society days, and you described how, I guess, they use like volts and amps, to build the devices, whereas you use the actual dimensions that Cayce did, because he talks about things in like inches and weights, as opposed to amps and that, and so uh, you built this thing like Cayce said to the geometric specifications, right?
Right, right.
And that's where the big difference there is between your results and their results, because I believe we live in a quantum world, and the geometry is inherent in everything we do, and I think Tesla believed that too. And like if you look at all of his inventions and that, there is a basic symmetry to them when he's building them. And when you start reading the notes in that, he talks in terms like on copper, he talks about how many pounds he used, not how many inches or feet of wire he used. He's talking pounds, he's talking weights, you know. So it's a different way, a different approach. And I think that if you don't follow that approach, you're not going to get the same results. Or if you do get the same results, it's just happenstance as opposed to what's really happening there.
Yeah, these people that took over, they're credential people, and they have these predetermined ideas about how things work. Cayce said this is the low form, but they didn't know what that meant, so they just went ahead and started building this stuff the way it used to be built. It went on for years. They had all these pilot studies, and they did all these studies with specific ailments, and they have Cayce people that were like suffering from these ailments come in, and they went through these programs and on and on and on, and they never had any luck with it. And all I was doing was saying, look, let's just do it the way Cayce suggested and see what happens.
Yeah, and that's the same. One of the same thing in the test world. Everybody has their version of what they're going to do, and they don't even bother reading Tesla's original work to see how Tesla did it.
Yeah.
And yet they're supposed to be Tesla experts. The other thing I noted is when you were able to heal people or they became well.
That's probably a better way of putting it.
Physically, they get pissed off at you.
There's a physical, a mental, and a spiritual component to life. Okay, so the amazing thing about the wet cell is that I saw people recover from their physical ailments and not let go of the mental dilemmas that actually had created the physical problems in the first place. I mean, that's how powerful the wet cell is. You can actually fix the body without fixing the mind.
Well, I think that happens more and more, even with modern medicine, and I don't think that they've paid enough attention to it, because I mean, like look at me, they went and drilled an artery out, Technically, that's pretty impressive, to be able to build a drill small enough to go up your arteries in your arm through your heart and start drilling out the calcium buildup in there and everything. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
From a technical viewpoint. Okay. But then once you get that done, then there's got to be a mental component, that has to go along with that healing, and you have to embrace the healing, I think, and in order for it to stay, because if you dwell on something, that's what you become, and so it's important for the mental attitudes to be addressed as well, especially with cancer and that. I kind of stay away from the cancer stuff pretty much because, for one, you're going to attract the ire of the medical world. And I won't be surprised if we get suppressed because of that on this show. We'll see. But
I didn't say cancer.
Huh?
I didn't say cancer.
No, but I did. But And that's how, we live in a super censorship world, especially the medical people are super sensitive, you know. And if someone comes up with an idea, that can fix things, they get all upset. I mean, look at the guy who invented the MRI device, the full body MRI device. Okay, the machine called Indomitable. Okay, they uh they were upset at the guy because it worked, and he just used it as a diagnostic device, and they mistook it to he was going to try to cure cancer with it, and so he would go like to these parties and that, and they'd be looking at him and they'd say, "Oh, you're working on this, right?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, hope it fail because I got kids to go to." So what's happening here is medicine became a moneymaker, and it seems like every time money, gets involved with things, it goes to hell, quite frankly. And I through my whole life, I've seen it, and I just don't, I don't know. We just got to be constantly focused, on doing the right thing, and ignore these people, I guess, you know. But like I say, the big thing that struck me, like in your writings and that, is that number one, you used a lot of geometry, and like I think we're talking about like even on the vase, that you had to get a tall vase, for the rods, because they had to be 14 inches or something like that, and you had to find like a device or a vessel that would hold that length of a rod and at a certain volume.
Yeah, it's a wet battery.
Yeah, so you have to have a certain volume of liquid with a very specific amount of rod in it, and part of that is basically, I don't know, physics or chemistry, where you have the surface area of the rod. It does specify like the width of the rod, or I can't remember.
Yeah,
Uh, like you
but
have a width, length, and height.
mostly about the waveform,
Yeah.
And later on, when I did finally get around to looking at the animated ash, this lamp that Cayce specifies to use, the distance between the bulb and the plate of green glass, which is at the end of the housing, because the light is filtered through this plate of green glass, right? The distance between that is actually the same ratio as the wet cell. It has that same waveform. And I go, oh, but I never would have known if I hadn't looked at that later on. But I mean, I proved the wet cell years before I, looked at the animated ash. And the animated ash, let's be honest, I mean, when people start recovering from cellular malignancy, you better not have your name on it because it's not gonna sit well with the powers that be.
Yeah.
So I mean, I do. No, I don't make any claims about it, and I leave it at that. I'm no martyr.
Well, I'm not a martyr either, but I guess I get, stubborn maybe. I don't know. I tend to try to, if something's working, try to stick with it. People get upset at me, because they have all these suggestions and everything. But hey, if you have a recipe, stick with the recipe. And and if you want to change things, go do another recipe. But yeah,
there's got to be a shift in consciousness. Why did it take 25 years for me to get back to it? Well, I waited until I felt like intuitively it was okay to go back to it. These people didn't say, "Oh, would you please let this go because we'd like to look at it ourselves, you know. It didn't go down like that at all. And
Well,
now, you know, 25 years later, I feel like it's okay to go back to it and say, okay, I'm going to pick this up where I left it off, and you know, hopefully get some funding this time around, because you know, when you do stuff on a shoestring budget, I was there for a whole decade during the 90s, and it took that long just to get to the point where people were realizing what I was doing was real.
well, everything's we're in flux right now. A big change is coming. A big change is here. Uh, Tomorrow night I'll be on uh, with the alien scientists, and we'll be discussing some of the stuff. But one of the things that's happening is, I know some people are gonna get upset at me, but global warming is here. Sorry, guys, it is here. You know, and it's not no microwave beaming things down. That is
Yeah.
basically warming up, and you got the Gulf, which is so hot, okay, so heated that it's it's doing a mass change, okay? Like a hurricane of today is not the same hurricane of the 1990s, okay? In 1990, when they came with me with the heart program and everything, which almost got me killed, but when they came at me with the heart, they told me that they could control hurricanes. And that year, they marched 11 of them right along the coastline, okay? I saw it happen. So what's going on now, though? That same technology isn't good enough. It's like, okay, you have steering on a car, okay, which is great for a car, like a Toyota or something, right? But now you got something the equivalent of an 18-wheeler here, because all this global warming is not only making the storm itself more intense, okay, it's pushing all this, is gathering all this water, and water is 8 pounds per gallon. That's a lot of mass, okay, and now it's pouring all this huge mass of water now that they never had before, and they're throwing it, against like Florida and North Carolina. No wonder they're having the floods they're having, because think about all that mass that just got dumped on them that was never there before. And the weather control people who are trying to control the weather don't have the technology for this, because it's thermal runaway. It's thermal runaway, and sometimes it's like trying to control a volcano. You can't control a volcano. You can try, and I believe, like you can sort of predict them, because you can through the electrical signals they give off before they erupt or before the earthquakes come. That is happening, and it's getting more and more. But it's all about massive changes on the earth. We're seeing earth changes. Go check out some of the global science videos. We talk about the earth changes that. And yeah, I was kind of a skeptic at one time, but I see this happening, and there's a practical reason why. When you start looking at the physics of things, and I think Cayce in his readings and that, he's picking up on that stuff. He's one of these people who are attuned to, his whole neural systems probably has quantum entanglement going on there, with the universe there, and to a greater degree than most people do, because I think we all do. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie Avatar, and these people all have tails. They plug in to like the other animals and to nature and that. I think that we probably all do that to some degree psychically. Wouldn't you? I don't know what your spins would be on that, Phil. I know I'm getting kind of off topic here, but
Yeah, it's
pretty deep. But I think it all relates, And the Cayce stuff, the Cayce readings, when you tell people that he's a psychic, they turn off automatically. They just turn their minds off and don't want to hear nothing about it. And then you get, the people who do have the readings in that, they look to capitalize on it, okay, profit from it, as opposed to actually trying to do what Cayce said. It's a big difference. It all gets back to intent.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
That's
Cayce says, it's like, if you're doing this for selfish purposes, then don't even start. And, the ego gets in the way, the greed gets in the way. And next thing you know, all these spiritual groups are like, just doing some terrible stuff. And, it's, I just go back to the readings and I say, look, Cayce said, and look, if you're, you have to have the right intention. And if you have that, then you can proceed forward and you can learn and you can, experiment and see what happens. And, but it's not about, making money or having power or any of that stuff. None of that stuff means anything really. It's all an illusion. So, I mean, the illusion I need is actually some money to finance the next phase. But aside from that, you have to have the right intention, and Cayce reiterates it numerous times throughout the readings, and that's the problem these people had. They never looked at the readings and said and looked at or maybe they read that, but they didn't take it to heart. It's like they're still they're just floundering in their own indecision about how to go about proceeding, because they don't understand that it's not about selfish pursuits.
I think intent is everything. I don't know how many get people dowels, out there, but the one thing about dowsing rod is at the end of the dowsing rod, you have to put what they call a witness. Okay, if you're looking for money, put money. Okay, if you're looking for gold, put gold. If you're looking for water, well, if you use a willow, you're going to find it, and if you use a coat hanger, you'll find the minerals in the water. Okay, but it's always about intent, and the witness is your intent. And I think once intent turns from the pursuit of knowledge, okay, into making money, I think that's where people start failing. They lose their vision, okay, and they make changes that they think they have to make in order to make money, and they try to keep themselves, and they always end up failing. I guess that's one of the things I worry about with Tesla Tech and everything. I don't want to get so big that the money becomes the issue as opposed to getting the information out. And that's what action we get down to it. That's what censorship is about. It's all about the money. They call what you're saying misinformation if it doesn't agree with what they're saying. And that's what we're faced with here. And I know there's other servers out there like Discord and everything, but then again, it just matters whose ox you're going to go. And when you're messing with the Cayce stuff and everything, well, and with the ARE, you definitely gored their ox. There, and you ruffle their feathers. Okay. Anyway, now we have some questions here. So here's Tom. He says, so the West cell gives iodine a positive charge, which makes better absorption? ?
There's a version of the wet cell that you use to actually charge the iodine. Yes, it's a much larger version, and you suspend the vial or container, glass container that holds the iodine into the wet battery, and then you run electricity through the poles. There's two poles that are also immersed in the solution, right? And you run like 30 amps through that, so it's not something for the faint-hearted. You know, you don't want to get in the middle of that field, but after about 15 minutes, that changes the structure of the iodine, and then that's how you make detoxified iodine.
Okay, I want to remind people too. Oops, wrong thing. That you can be reached at iodinesource.com. We have a whole website there. Can they buy these stuff from you?
Yeah. What I've been doing for the last, I don't know, well, ever since I left the beach, I've been making my living at that, and the the iodine's there, a few of the Cayce products. I don't make a lot of them. I stick with a few basic things, and I just reintroduced the wet cell. It's not for sale yet, but there's at the top of the products page, I posted a picture of the wet cell, and then a little bit of copy about what it is, and how I'd like to move forward.
And one of the things that helps me, is like I try to visualize where I want to be at, and that helps me get to where I'm going to go at. So have you visualized where you want to be at yet? Say like.
It's all coming together. I look for the signs. I don't try and, it's like, prayer is a big thing with the ARE people. And, I'm all in favor of that. But, they're always praying for stuff that they want, and it's like, the creative force is going to open the door for you, when the time is right. And so I'm just thankful for, what I have, and, what I'm able to do. And that covers all my bases. I don't have to ask for specific things and say, oh, I need this, or please give me some money or something like that, And I don't live high, but it's pretty extraordinary when you just get in the zone.
Okay, well, here's a question. It says 30 amps would make it boil. Are you using the precipitate then?
It's only 15 minutes, so it gets pretty hot. It's a big vessel. The wet cell itself is 1.5 gallons. The ones that I use are 5-gallon containers, and I do them in series. So, yeah, it would boil if you went probably 30 minutes, because it gets pretty hot.
So are you going to plan on putting out any more papers or articles on this stuff?
I think, the way that I've approached this is without marketing or advertising. I just want to make it available. I want to, like, I'm thinking that at some point, somebody who's in a position to do something positive and productive with these ideas will say, okay, well, let's try it and see. And then once they find out that it's for real, then they'll say, okay, well, then this is how we can move forward. I don't have to be the person that, puts my name on it or anything like that. Even when these people took over at the beach, and they weren't nice about it at all. But all I told them was, I said, look, just do it the way I did it. And I showed them what I was doing. And I said, here, just do it the way I did it, and you'll have success. But they were doctors and psychologists and, credentialed people, So they knew more about it than me, and they never did. They never followed readings.
Well, all these credentials, they look pretty impressive and everything. But it's been my experience, that that credential is just for a specific field, and it's a very narrow base of knowledge you have there. And yet these people want to use that and give themselves credibility across for everything. And it's ridiculous. And I don't know. I look at Tesla, and he's kind of like my hero, and also Edison in some ways, in that they didn't insist on using their putting I don't know, abbreviations behind their names or whatever. You know, uh, so people like me, and at my conference most of the time, I just tend to do that on the introduction for that reason, because I figure if you're talking about something, you're the expert of that field. Uh, I also don't do peer review either, in my magazines and that. I hope to get those back up and running. But the reason being is, if you guys are so much um, on the cutting edge, you really have no peers. So, oh, here we go. The alien scientist is here. So, yeah, so you have no peers, and therefore peer review is irrelevant. It's kind of like the blind leading the blind here. And that's my opinion on peer review. And I know some people would get upset about that, but I don't denigrate the value of a good education, though, because you can learn. A good education teach you how to think, and that's the part that's missing from our education. It seems, is the critical thinking skills. Like when you went in there and you're looking at what Cayce did verbatim, you know, he got results. And you kind of had. Now, if you went in there with a doctorate or something, in let's say electrical engineering, you would have wanted everything to be in terms of amps and volts and that, because that's what you understand, you know. And I think the geometry issue gets away from people. Now, I think the geometry is so important. I mean, uh, Dan Davison, bless his soul, he's no longer with us. Uh, I didn't make an announcement that earlier this year, but Dan Davison has passed away. But he wrote that book, Shape Power, and he's talking about anti-gravity, and it gets back to the same thing. It's the geometric uh, manifestations of the beetle that gives its anti-gravity effects in that. So there we go. Okay, here we go. Another question here. Okay, how many types of iodine are in the detoxified iodine?
There's only one iodine, actually. It's most of it, the bulk of it, is actually mined out of the earth down in Chile. And what happened in these ancient seabeds was it got caught up in these pockets down, and now it's down deep below the surface of the earth, and they bring it up to the surface and they clean it up, and then they sell it all over the world. It's there's not too much. There's a little bit going on in the U.S., but not much. We've never really looked for it. And iodine, it's one of four halogens: iodine, bromine, chlorine, fluorine, right, on the periodic chart. So the higher up you go, the more caustic it is. That's what a halogen is. It's a poison. But iodine is actually an essential element, and you need it. So how do you get it into your body? It only bonds with living things in the ocean. So if you go to Japan, where they eat seafood 3 times a day, they're fine. Fukushima was 80 miles away from Tokyo. And those people are fine. Why? Because they eat seafood, they get iodine in their diet, their thyroids are protected from the radiation, although most of it was blown out to the ocean. But the thyroids are hypersensitive to radiation. And the only way you can protect them is with iodine. And because it's in that form, you have to detoxify it if you're going to be able to take it, in the quantities that most people need at this point to, protect the thyroids and the reproductive glands.
Okay. And then you have Mikey, is this Edgar Cayce? Yes, this is Edgar Cayce we're talking about here. And then he also says it's possible the iodide burns out the thyroid. Well, I think that'd be, along with anything else, I mean, too much of a good thing.
Iodine is a very powerful element. That's why it works.
So,
it can overpower, it'll kill any bacteria or virus that it comes into contact with. So during COVID, I was in discussion with a couple of different doctors and stuff, about the idea of trying to implement it somehow into the system so that people could begin to understand how to use it to, pump up the thyroids, which in turn then turns on the autoimmune system, right? The thyroids are directly correlated to the autoimmune response. So, you need that when you're dealing with a virus. And the other thing is, it'll kill anything that it comes into contact with. So if you can get it into the body in a form that the body can recognize and fully assimilate, then what Cayce was saying is still 100 years ahead of his time.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm looking at going back again to our conferences and that, and how we have a hard time getting people to come to conferences. Now's the time for people to come to them because our people are crossing over the other side right now at an accelerated rates. It seems like maybe it's just because I'm that old. I feel like these days I need to go look at the obituaries and see if I'm in there. Sometimes. Yeah. It's just a thing. Well, anyway, here goes Tom.
I told you, if you want to have me at the front door of your next conference, I'll inoculate everybody that comes in there, and no one will bring in a virus that's going to spread. That's how powerful iodine is.
Okay, here's a question. You didn't answer my question. What's the one form of iodine you were talking about?
It's called atomidine in the Cayce readings, or atomic iodine. So it's not in its original state. The term nascent means in its original state, so that's a misnomer. It's actually atomic iodine.
This one goes, I heard iodine is the body's antiseptic, and sepsis is a huge cause of mortality. Well, that's my biggest fear, is sepsis.
Everybody's.
Wow.
When you go into a hospital, it's a closed environment. They clean constantly, and they actually use iodine in hospitals too.
Yeah, and my dad died from sepsis. Okay, he had an aneurysm on his heart. They went in, they fixed it, and then somehow sepsis set in and it killed him within a week.
God,
So here it is, 20 years later. I'm going in the hospital, and they're going to be doing these stents, as opposed to, because I wanted them to do a bypass, that'd be even worse. But my biggest fear was that I get sepsis, and that would kill me. So yeah, sepsis is huge, and it's not that I fear death. It's just that I'm not ready to go just yet. So, okay, then he goes, I use nascent, now used to
Lugol's. Lugol's has been the standard in the industry since Cayce started talking about this stuff. It's been around for 100 years, and it's helped a lot of people, millions of people. But it's raw iodine, and it's a high concentration. Usually is like 5%. The stuff that I make is 1% concentration, because you don't need a high concentration of this stuff when it's in a form that the body can assimilate. So when you take Lugol's, there's a pretty good chance that you're gonna it's gonna push you over, because it's so concentrated. It's a powerful element, and because of that, during the last 100 years, even though it's helped millions of people, it's also been very difficult to control. Because a lot of people end up getting too much, and then they get stressed. It's a stimulant. So you don't need to overstimulate the system.
So these are brand names then?
Nascent is a term that I trained this guy many years ago. He's gone now because he didn't do what I asked him to do. No, I'm just kidding. He did what I told him to do about the electrification process. And then he decided he was going to become the person that was going to do this. And so he decided he was going to name it something so that it would be distinguish what he was doing from what I was doing. So he's an engineer type, so he called it nascent. And nascent is actually, if you look in the dictionary, nascent means in its original form. Well, iodine that's charged electrically is no longer in its original form, so it's not really the right term to use. But and then ultimately, after Fukushima happened, because I've been doing this for a long time, about 25 years, he got so busy because he was a big marketer and pushing all this stuff, advertising, marketing all over the place. And he got so busy that he couldn't keep up with the charging process. So he just stuck some magnets on the outside of the charging batteries, and or on the outside of the iodine, these whatever he was using. And he said, "Oh, well, that'll do the same thing." Well, it doesn't. Electricity is a totally different thing from magnets. And when you put an electrical charge on something, that's different than influencing it with a magnetic field. So that's the way he shifted it to. And then, of course, after that, it was no longer detoxified. It was just iodine. But he was so popular and so famous at that point that his business just kept going and going.
And that's the nascent?
Yeah, that's the nascent.
Or nascent, yeah, okay. And then the Lugol's is
Lugol's is just a standard. It's usually potassium iodine.
Okay.
Potassium and iodine. Those are two separate elements, and they bond them together so that they think if it's water soluble, then the body will be able to assimilate it easier because the body is 75% water, right? It sort of makes sense logically, but it's not true. The body does not assimilate iodine better if it's bonded with potassium. Potassium is an element too, but it doesn't actually help the iodine or selenium or any of these other ideas that people come up with. Iodine is it, just iodine.
Well, with that, I'm going to kind of call it tonight and remind everyone I'll be on Alien Scientist tomorrow. I'll see if I can't stream it somewhere. If I do, I'll send out an email. And I'd like to remind everyone we're not going to have a show next week because I am going to be at the Biomed conference at Alexis Park, and maybe I'll see some of you there. I don't know. And I'll sure tell you what's going to happen. Then after that, the next week, we're going to have Bob Herlick here. And he'll be talking about his water technology and the work he's been doing with Malcolm Bindle. I believe you all remember him from our conference last year before last. Yeah, last year. So, and then after that, we'll have Toby Gross. So be looking for our emails and that. And I hope to see you all here next week. Remind everyone to consider signing up for the video on demand. It really helps us out when you do that. And at the very least, take and become a subscriber on YouTube channel. That really helps us out too, you know. Um, so, and while you're there, if you watch this on YouTube, don't forget to give us a thumbs up, you know. If you like the nice show and if you'd like to see more of this type of stuff, let me know. So you all have a good day, and we'll see you in another week. Thank you.